Greetings! DF のジョンです。今回は新作の龍が如くなんですけど、龍が如くが発売されたから10年が経過しました。今、シリーズの記念日のために最初のゲームが戻ってきました。今作の龍が如く記憶は、初代龍が如くを完全新作として作り直したリメイク作品。ただのリメイク作品というよりは、新たな追加要素を多数加えた龍が如くの完全版ソフト。Alright, that's enough of that. But hey, this is Yakuza we're talking about here, so it's hard not to get in the mood. After all, since its release in 2005, this series has become one of Sega's most popular, at least in Japan anyways. Unfortunately, it hasn't quite taken off in the West to the same degree, and as a result, a good number of titles in the series remain exclusive to the Japanese market. Thankfully, things are looking up for fans of the series over here, with Yakuza 5 having been released late last year, and Yakuza 0 announced for North American release. Of course, the game we're looking at today has not yet been announced for the West, but it certainly seems like a good fit. As a remake of the original game, it gives players a chance to start over from the series beginning, without dealing with the often complex backstory. Sure, the games have always done a good job catching up players to the present, but it can still be daunting to jump into the fourth or fifth game in a series with no prior knowledge. This isn't the first time that the original has seen the light of day on modern consoles either. The PS2 games were remastered and released in Japan on both PlayStation 3 and the Wii U a few years back, but Kiwami goes much further. It benefits greatly from years of refinements, which in turn help create an experience that looks and plays so much better than the originals ever could. So we were curious, just how does this remake stack up against the PS2 original? To find out, we strapped in and stepped back into the world of Sega, circa 2005. Seeing that we're talking about a PlayStation 2 game here, it should really come as no surprise that it runs at a low, interlaced resolution, though unlike many PlayStation 2 titles, the frame rate is only 30 frames per second. We're running the game through a Mikamsoft Frame Meister here, but the results can be significantly muddier without an upscaler. Which is of course why the PS4 version feels so good with its full 1080p output. The bump in resolution also brings along excellent texture filtering, a basic post-process anti-aliasing, and a smooth 60 frames per second frame rate. And those factors come together to great effect. The resulting image is free of typical shader aliasing and shimmering common in so many games. Instead, it has a sharp, clean appearance that could only be described as Sega. It doesn't attempt to deliver the latest in graphics technology, but it has a style that holds up really well. The game is actually based on the engine created for Yakuza 3 on PlayStation 3, and in fact, Kiwami is available there as well. Yet on Sony's last generation platform, these games typically operate at just 1024x768 at 30 frames per second. So the jump to 1080p 60 on PS4 makes a world of difference here. One of the first things that stands out is the fact that many of the cutscenes play back exactly as they did on PlayStation 2. The rigging, camera work, and animation is all identical in these scenes to the point where everything just lined right up when we stacked the two captures on top of one another. But is that actually a good thing though? Well, it's true that the scene playback is very similar, but the massive increase in detail and resolution is immediately apparent, and it has a transformative effect. The PS2 version also tends to rely heavily on pre-rendered cinematics, which sometimes fail to mesh with the real-time gameplay. On PS4, most scenes are now rendered in real time instead, and as a result, blend more naturally with the game itself. As with many other PlayStation 2 games, the original release focuses on creating attractive visuals without relying too heavily on detailed textures. With so little memory available, this was a must on the platform, so we see lots of basic shading and flat colors instead. You can really see this in the character faces and outfits. Kiryu's white suit, for instance, lacks fine details, but it still manages to look pretty good. In jumping to the new engine, the designers amped up all of the finer details, producing a fine-grained appearance that adds a lot to the experience. Just look at the threads on Kiryu's suit in comparison to the original, or the detailed facial textures, which do look a tad flat without subsurface scattering, I suppose, but it still looks nice nonetheless. We also see things like improved depth of field used to bring focus to certain characters and objects, enhanced weather effects, and improved shadow work. None of it is cutting edge, but at such a fluid frame rate with such nice image quality, it all comes together really well. Once in-game, things become more difficult to compare due to the nature of the camera. On PS2, Yakuza makes use of a fixed camera system which changes based on player positioning. Unlike some games with this system, however, each camera switch represents a scene change. That is, the game must load in each new scene as the player moves between camera boundaries. This results in very noticeable hitching when moving from area to area. On PS4, however, Kiwami uses an adjustable camera just like other more recent games in the series. This means that much larger chunks of the game world must be loaded, creating a more seamless experience overall. You can run across the town without any interruptions now. Yet this doesn't always feel like an optimal solution. The game features a lot of enclosed spaces with tight corridors, and in these areas, the free camera tends to get lost easily. As a result, it sometimes feels as if you're battling the camera in this new version. Outside of exploration, Yakuza features a lot of combat, and it's here that another PS4 benefit shines through. You see, in its original form, players are forced to sit through a near constant barrage of loading screens. Nearly everything that can happen in the game is bookended by loading. This becomes incredibly tedious, especially when dealing with street fights that can break out at any time. Thankfully, on PS4, the game is able to quickly transition in and out of battle without breaking the flow of the game. This has a tremendously beneficial impact on the overall experience that makes for a much more playable overall game. So how about performance then? We noted earlier that it operates at 1080p 60 on PlayStation 4, but there are some variations. For one thing, cutscenes are limited to 30 frames per second, which I suppose isn't really a big deal. In-game though, we did run across a few instances of slowdown where torn frames were introduced as the renderer goes over budget. You can see exactly what we mean right here. Thankfully, instances of slowdown like this are remarkably rare during gameplay, so it's not really something that will greatly impact the experience, but it is worth noting. Either way, it's a huge leap over the 30 FPS with slowdown level of performance we see on PlayStation 2. Beyond the technology powering the game, there's a lot of new content included as well. Cutscenes are often expanded upon, while entirely new scenarios are created for the player to enjoy. You never know when new content will pop up during gameplay. In addition, the voiceovers have been re-recorded, even if much of the script is identical.
すみません、本当。こんな取り立てに出張ってもらうなんて。
すみません、本当。こんな取り立てに出張ってもらうなんて。
While the previously text-only sections now feature full voice work.
どこの奴らなんだ、その取り立ての相手は。
すぐ近くの町金です。
You can even choose between two different fonts and save your game anywhere, both of which are very convenient features. Though I still cannot fathom why the series defaults to a fully inverted camera. Does anyone really want the camera to move in the opposite direction of the analog stick? Ultimately, this is one solid remake that manages to bring together many of the best elements from the series and retell the original story. We can only hope that sometime in the not so distant future, both Yakuza Kiwami and Yakuza 6 are announced for Western release. It certainly feels like the series is starting to gain more appreciation worldwide after all. Anyways, that wraps up this video, and until next time, this is John, signing off.